Chapter 22. Taylor, 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 Rhodes, LeBon. Shortly after that gig, we made a decision to split all our earnings equally. Every penny of every ticket sold, and the proceeds of every album that we would make, every song we would write, we would split 5 ways. Just as importantly, every song was going to be credited Taylor, 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 Rhodes, LeBon, a most fashion-conscious business partnership if ever there was one. It gave us all an equal stake in the band, and we each had to respect the others. It's the reason we're still together today. There are very, very few bands that work that way, but Duran was always different. We had been formed by the sidemen, Nick and myself, working inward from the outside, rather than being built around a singer-songwriter, which is the more usual way bands come into being. So having that equality came naturally. Duran was a teenage democracy. When you're grinding out those hours in the studio, making those all-night drives from Philadelphia to wherever, everybody is equal. This is one of my basic beliefs. Anyone can come up with the germ of an idea, but it's worth nothing unless you have a team that is prepared to push and develop that idea until it becomes something tangible, and then it has to be sold. This philosophy of equality was something we wore with pride. We were excited by the idea. It felt modern. I could imagine meeting record company people and saying, "Yeah, we write all the songs together and we split everything 5 ways. What are you going to do about it?" The sound was evolving, as was the picture. Time for a logo, something different. We met John Warwicker, who was also at university in Birmingham, and asked him to design some posters for us. John would later start the design company Tomato. He came up with something pretty spectacular, totally different and totally now. The posters were triangular, in neon blue and pink. The Rum Runners Mirrorflex formed the backdrop. We went out at night with glue pots and covered the city in our new identity. Mike Barrow didn't run fast enough and got arrested. Further proof the Barrows were as committed as the 5 of us were. The arrangements we came to with Mike and Paul, including the percentages they would receive from our recordings, live appearances and merchandise, would be the subject of many heated debates in years to come. Some of us are still angry, some of us are philosophical. Whatever decisions we made back then, however naive it may seem with the perspective of 30 years' experience, I tend to feel that what we did was cool, because it got the show on the road and motivated everyone. There were 5 stars on stage, and our managers were stars too. They were no schmucks put in place to simply follow our dictates. They were creative and they had vision, and that allowed us to concentrate on what was most important. They bought time at Air Studios in London, our first experience of a 24-track studio. One of my favourite bands, Japan, were working down the hall. We recorded a new version of Girls on Film, which still was not quite right, and a version of Tel Aviv that would also change considerably before it found its way onto the debut album. We were getting a look together, so that when we walked out on stage, we A, looked like a band, and B, didn't look like any other band, so they bought us clothes. Then they organised and paid for photo sessions with name photographers. We got an agent in London, Rob Hallett at the Derek Block Agency. He became our first champion in the capital, someone in the business talking up the band, and Rob had a big mouth. Rob had connections in Birmingham, as he represented both UB40 and Dex's Midnight Runners. He heard from Dex's manager that we were going to be the next success out of the city. An agent's primary function is to book gigs. Rob got us a coveted spot at London's Marquee Club. Another Barrow investment was required to get us up and down the motorway to London in style. No Ford Transit vans for us. We acquired a late 70s 6-seater Citroën CS in French blue. Man, we nailed that accelerator to the floor once we hit the motorway. At the wheel would be Simon Cook, a friend of ours from the Rum Runner crowd who was now being employed by us as a driver and minder. He was a great spirit to have on board, and ex-army, so we would never again have to worry about encounters with aggressive football fans. The Citroën would cover a lot of miles, most of them up and down the M1 motorway. Our equipment would follow in a rented Ford van driven by another member of the growing team. It was Simon Cook who indirectly gave Simon LeBon the nickname Charlie. One evening, Andy got frustrated at having 2 Simons around and said, "I can't fucking handle this. You, LeBon, what's your middle name?" "Charles," SLB replied, reluctantly. "Right," says AT. "You're Charlie, and you," pointing his talon at Simon Cook, "are Simon." We were beginning to learn not to argue with Andy when his blood was up. Rob Hallett soon followed up the marquee booking with a prestige gig at the Lyceum Theatre, opening for Pauline Murray and the Invisible Girls. John Cooper Clarke was also on the bill. Anyone who has visited the Lyceum in London knows what a beautiful theatre it is. In terms of architecture and decor, there's nothing like it in Birmingham. It was the biggest stage I'd ever walked out onto, and it was intimidating, not just because of the architecture, but also due to the London punters, who tended to look down on Brummies from a very great height, and also because of the possibility of a writer from the NME turning up, or record company A&R men. We had to be at our best, and we were up for it. There was something reassuring about the feel of the springy boards under our feet. For over 100 years, the greatest entertainers in the country had been walking on that stage, and a heritage like that cannot help but rub off on you. When I stepped out onto that stage, under the most lights I had ever faced, and playing through the biggest sound system I had ever plugged into, I was stepping into a tradition and couldn't help but get caught up in it. Simon would have felt it too, with his stage upbringing, his mother reminding him, "Eyes and teeth, Simon, eyes and teeth." It was possible his grandmother had appeared on that very stage. Our opening act set lasted just 30 minutes, but it stirred up just the right amount of interest in the audience and in the industry players who were there to see us, or one of the other acts on the bill. We were certainly as much discussed as the headline act. One of the reasons I had the confidence to grow into these bigger venues was because of what I was beginning to understand about Roger, that he was entirely reliable, that there was never any drama, anger, or bullshit. As a drummer and as a man, he's always on time. For a bass player, trying to become a better bass player, trying to become a performer, that was of critical importance. Roger and I are always the first to congratulate each other on a job well done after a show, albeit in an extremely low-key way. Roger: "I thought that was pretty good." Me: "Best one yet." Roger: "It took me a while to get into it. My fucking headphones fell off in the second song." Me: "Really? I thought you were good." Roger: "One or two nice-looking chicks out there." Me: "Definitely." Roger: "I think I'll go and have a drink at the bar. Watch Pauline Murray." "Okay. See you out there." Of course, chicks out there would not have been any use to us that night, as we would all be crammed back in the Citroen by midnight, heading back to Birmingham, arriving home just in time for a nightcap at the Rum Runner.